Viewer contributions make local programming possible on WNIN. Become a member of WNIN with your contribution so we can continue to make this programming available. Visit WNIN.org and click on the donate button.
We're 2.5 months into the 2025 Indiana General Assembly session. This week, we'll talk with Indiana State Representative Wendy McNamara about the budget bill and other legislative priorities. WNIN Lawmakers starts right now. Welcome to WNIN Lawmakers. I'm Noah Alatza, the Chief Communications Officer for the University of Evansville. We'll speak with Representative McNamara in just a moment, but first let's hear from Indiana Public Broadcasting's Brandon Smith about what's happening right now at the State House.
Student IDs from Indiana public colleges and universities have been used for decades as one of the few acceptable forms of voter ID at polling places. Legislation approved along party lines in a House committee would end that. Supporters say it merely makes students comply with the same requirements as other voters. Opponents call it voter suppression. A bill unanimously approved at every step in the legislative process would set aside 200 of the state's thousands of child care and development fund vouchers for foster families. The only concern with the measure is that with no additional funding in the state budget so far, it will help increase the existing CCDF waitlist that's already 7,600 children long. And the first bill signed into law by the governor creates an online portal for Hoosier farmers, connecting them with state and federal agencies. It's aimed to help with regulatory checklists, grant funding opportunities, and feedback on state and federal policies. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
We're now joined by Indiana State Representative Wendy McNamara, who represents Posey County and a portion of western Vanderburgh County. Representative McNamara, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I first wanted to talk to you about what's happened this week up at the State House. House Bill 1149 became the first bill that Governor Braun signed. It creates this online portal for farmers. Could you explain what is included in that portal?
There's a lot included in that, but probably the most important part is federal grants for our farmers to be able to be aware of when they're available, what types of grants that they can apply for. As you know, farming is the cornerstone of Hoosier farmland, Hoosier heartland, and we want to make sure that we can give them every available tool so that if they need to go purchase new equipment or if there's some incentives for them to try a new or different crop, this portal should be able to provide them that opportunity.
And last time you were here, just about a month ago, we just saw you. Welcome back. Thanks for being here again. We discussed the small nuclear reactor proposals and the funding for them. So that final measure now, SB 424, that's headed to the governor's desk, would allow utilities to pass some of the cost on to consumers. Could you just speak on what was included in that bill that ended up garnering your support?
So I think it's wise for us to look at all types of alternative energy in the state, many nuclear reactors being one of them. And, you know, I still have some concerns over the fact of some of the costs being on the ratepayer due to a lot of issues in our community, you know, with our utility rates already being pretty high. But we do have R&D things to consider. And with other types of technologies that are out there, I think similar patterns have taken place. And I'm hopeful that through the processes, we continue as a state to grow and look at our options. Because one thing that people don't talk about is to bring a lot of business to Indiana that uses a great deal of energy. So let's give an example of a data center. A lot of people don't think of a data center in terms of an energy producer, but they really need to use a lot of energy. They also need to use a lot of water. So for us to have alternatives to be able to handle that on our grid, we have to look at everything in one way or another.
I'm curious, as we move on House Bill 1248, this one's also on the governor's desk. It provides these child care vouchers for foster kids. Why do you think that this was passed unanimously throughout this entire process? Do you anticipate that Governor Braun's going to sign it?
I sure hope the governor signs it. You know, foster care has a very warm place in my heart. Foster kids, I've spent a great deal of time working on legislation for them, on behalf of them. And we are in great need of foster care families. At one point, we needed 250 just in the Evansville area. And anything that can incentivize someone to be a foster parent, if that means that I can get a voucher to pay for daycare, then it's everywhere worth it in every means. And, you know, so I hope the governor signs it. It would make a difference if it's going to say, I can now afford to be a foster parent because I can, you know, have that child go to daycare. And I hope that's the case, and I would assume the governor would sign that.
And Representative McNamara, you know, we are just a couple of months into the session now, starting to close it out. On the Medicaid wait list for home or community-based services, that has maxed out at 10,000 people, as you know. Do you feel that there is any way to speed up the process so there isn't so much of a backlog? Is there a need for more staffing, et cetera?
Medicaid is going to start eating up bigger and bigger and bigger portions of Indiana's budget. Certainly, we don't want anybody who needs services on a wait list. But we have to identify those people that truly should have all the services, and I think that's part of the problem that, you know, got us into this situation. FSSA with their $1 billion over budget issue last year. But if there's legitimate needs for Medicaid, and specifically Medicaid waivers and home services, I don't think it's a good situation to have a very long wait list. But again, we're looking at a very finite amount of money available. I want to say we're going to be around somewhere 22% of the state budget is going to go towards Medicaid, and that is a huge chunk. And somewhere there's going to be cuts that have to be taken away to be able to fill that void. Unfortunately, I think wait lists are inevitable in situations like that, but I hope that through creativity, we can address those issues and have those folks, you know, process through and have fewer people on a wait list.
You said it takes up 22% of the state's budget. Historically, is that a large number?
It's never been that large. It's always floated somewhere to, you know, 12, 15%. So I would say, but that's just a projection. It might not wind up being that high, but it's a fear that that's where we're headed.
Wow. So we'll move on now, and this was a bill that you had sponsored, SB 74, the Lifeline Law. You supported it, obviously sponsored it, and it's now on the governor's desk. Can you explain what it does?
Senate Bill 74 is an extension of the Lifeline Law, and it's a life-saving measure for primarily focused on your universities. And in 2012, I believe, is when it was first passed. And what it did was allow somebody to call on behalf of someone who is maybe overdosing or had consumed too much alcohol. And it applied to the person making the phone call. So the bill this year extends that to actually the victim who has consumed too much alcohol. And it will allow them the opportunity to make sure the phone call is made. They have to be able to meet some certain criteria. They'll have to, you know, give their name. They wouldn't be charged with minor consumption of alcohol and other minor offenses. So it's a life-saving measure, and really we're at a point of just making sure it's education. And a lot of the transition from high school to college, I've talked with several students from Purdue University who were instrumental in getting this passed. They were behind it. They're trying to re-energize the conversations that they're having with new students coming to the university. So it's going to be part of their program when the incoming freshmen come to campus. They'll talk about the Lifeline Law. They'll talk about situations that sometimes, unfortunately, you know, students find themselves in: human trafficking, sexual assault, things like that. So this particular measure will go a long way in hopefully providing education, but as well, you know, save somebody's life and provide responsibilities.
Why was this so important for you to want to become a sponsor of Senate Bill 74?
I've spent my life around high school kids. I've seen them make bad decisions, but also it gives them the opportunity to be responsible. And so there's that weighing of, we're allowing you to make that mistake, but we're also making sure that we're looking out for others to save their life if necessary.
So SB 211, this would allow clean water funding to be diverted to combat invasive plant species in the state. It passed both the House and Senate almost unanimously. Why do you think it got so much support at the end of the day?
Well, clean water, as you know, has made the news in the last 5-10 years, and so that's really important. Invasive species, you can look around right now in spring, and people talk about the dogwoods being the invasive species. This is just another proactive measure to make sure that we have clean drinking water and keep these invasive species out of our drinking water and make it a little bit easier for our systems to work in the state.
And Representative McNamara, last time that you were here, we had previously discussed SB 289. This would prohibit diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in state agencies, educational institutions, and health profession licensing boards. At the time, you weren't happy with the wording of that measure. Do you have an update you could share on the status of that bill right now?
I believe the bill is going to be heard on Monday in House Judiciary. It will look drastically different than the Senate version. It'll focus more on non-discrimination verbiage that is currently in law, but specifics, I can't give you that in detail right now.
Sure. What do you tell your constituents who see this bill and might not necessarily be supportive of it? How do you reassure them as the axe, so to speak, is being swung on DEI, not only in the state, but obviously across the country right now?
When you have that conversation, what we're really trying to say is this isn't a DEI bill. It's a non-discrimination bill. It's making sure that based on your race, your color, your creed, you aren't going to discriminate against anybody. So that's really what we hope to be the end product, is coming out as the understanding that we don't want to discriminate against anybody, regardless of what your views might be. And so that's our hope when the bill comes out of the House.
Another hot topic I know that's brewing not only at the state level, but also at the federal level, but particularly here in Indiana, House Bill 1041, currently working its way through the Senate right now, as you're aware. It would say that student athletics be categorized as male, female, or co-ed. Again, some people concerned about what happens if a student's gender is perhaps challenged. So Howard, what do you tell the individuals watching, your constituents? How do you reassure them that athletes won't be victimized by potentially being challenged for what their gender, what they identify with?
I think it's just putting into statute what the IHSAA has always been doing for the past few years, making sure that girls are participating in girls' sports and boys are participating in boys' sports. And if there happens to be co-ed, then that's that particular situation. I will be honest with you, my constituents are very strongly in favor of making sure that girls play in girls' sports and boys play in boys' sports. So that's why I support that measure. And being a female athlete myself, growing up and sometimes finding myself engaged in maybe a basketball game against the boys, I got out lucky sometimes and other times I did not. So we just want to make sure that everything's fair and across the board and really just putting into statute what IHSAA was already doing.
So we're also following Senate Bill 472. This is working its way through the House. It would set cybersecurity standards for school systems. What are your thoughts on that, especially as someone who's been in education for 30 plus years? So
as we know, cybersecurity issues across the board are really important. The state of Indiana actually, through their information technology, provides a lot of education to our local government, to our schools as well. And, as you know, people have been hacked and asked for money or expenses to pay for those. And most recently, Power School Nationwide, which is our data system for EVSC, was hacked. I'm one of those people who, has possibly had their information, out there. So it's a very real threat. and as much providing security for us and our students, and ultimately the families as well, is really critical to making sure that we protect everybody's information, and so that's very easy to support.
I definitely wanted to get your take too, as someone who's worked in education, as I mentioned, 30 years. You're now at the EVSC. Your thoughts about the federal government dissolving the Department of Education. Do you have any idea what that could perhaps even mean locally for our area?
For all areas, not just Indiana, but the nation. A lot of the federal dollars had specific ties to it. You take the money, we have to do A, B, or C. My concern would be, if there was one, will we continue to get the same amount of dollars that we do for special ed or other Title I dollars for specific projects in our state? That would be my concern, is just making sure that if we are going to dissolve them, we continue to get the same amount of money to cover those things that are federally mandated that we take care of, and special education being one of them.
Their tagline, at least at the federal level, Representative McNamara, and don't want you to necessarily weigh in too deep on this, but definitely want to talk with you because you are the expert when it comes to education. It's that they want to return education back to the states, the local municipalities, to the teachers. Is that something that you would support or believe in?
Absolutely. It gives them the flexibility in the classroom and in the school to, really drill down on what in that community might be a specific need or want. Back in 2012, I did what's called a career and technical education diploma, went around the state talking about that because, what might be a need here in Evansville might not be a need in northern Indiana. For example, welders. We really need welders. But if we were to focus on, let's say, something other than that, let's say electricians, I don't know for sure, that, and we're told that we had to focus on that other particular thing. I think this gives them the opportunity to make the education localized and gives them the opportunity to focus on what the needs are in those particular communities.
Are there any moves being made at the federal level too that you're also keeping your eye on that may perhaps impact Evansville or the state?
It's hard to keep up with the daily changes. Sure. So, I'm sure there'll be some eventually down the line that will impact us. But as long as we don't overreact and continue to be proactive on the things that we do, I think it'll be important to make sure we have all of the knowledge before making a determination of how that's going to impact us.
How about any of these bills that you've submitted this year, some of them maybe? How are they doing?
Well, 3 of my bills were signed into law this week. One of them was a very critical bill to law enforcement. 2 years ago, I passed a bill that created a 25-foot buffer zone around law enforcement. It was challenged and wound up in 2 different federal courts with 2 different outcomes. So this bill hopefully satisfies the one that didn't agree with us and will ultimately go back to providing that 25-foot buffer zone around law enforcement, which is critical because prior to that bill a couple of years ago, if I wanted to have a third party who wasn't even involved in the situation, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm having a conversation with you one-on-one, this third party person comes and tries to interfere, they would have to touch me as a law enforcement officer before I could do something about, getting them out of the situation. There's also critically important investigations that law enforcement has to do that might need to be private. So, if you have a domestic violence victim, a rape victim, and you have somebody who's not involved in it at all, trying to interfere, it gives law enforcement the opportunity to ask that person to go back 25 feet. And then if they refuse to do so, they can be charged with a C misdemeanor. So the governor signed that this week. One that is also critically important to Indiana, that's a federal initiative, is creating a concurrent jurisdiction for juveniles on military bases. That stems from an issue in Oregon in which 2 juveniles, one the perpetrator and one the victim, were on a military base. The victim was raped, and because there wasn't really a concurrent jurisdiction where the state could address the issue, both the victim and the assailant didn't have a fair trial and that sort of an outcome. So what this does is allow the governor to request concurrent jurisdiction where the state courts would take over if that situation to arise. The likelihood of that happening is probably not very high because we don't necessarily have a large number of juveniles on any of our military installations that live there, but it'll be there if we need it.
I want to go back to the buffer zone for a second.
Sure.
How does that 25-foot, whatever you want to call it, separation, how does that impact, you're at a local media public television station right now,
Yeah.
how does that impact local media, reporters that might roll up on the scene of a shooting, a stabbing, whatever that might be? They have to still abide by the 25-foot, I'm assuming.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
And the reason being is, again, that privacy issue, but 25 foot is not very far. It's a very short distance,
Sure.
but it gives law enforcement the opportunity to react in hostile situations. And it's based on how much time it would take a law enforcement officer to react if somebody charged at them with a knife, if they were able to protect themselves. And you have less than 22 feet to be able to do that. So it's a training mechanism that law enforcement goes through, so that's why we settled on 25 feet. But it's really, if you talk to any law enforcement officer that was able to actually do this for the year that was in effect, it really calms down the situation by, having the parties that aren't directly involved take a time out and settle down and think about what they're going to say and what they're going to do. It really diffuses a lot of the anger. So there's been a lot of positive reaction from not just law enforcement, but people who found themselves in that situation. No, it doesn't infringe on any news media or right to film, tape, whatever. Just creates that 25-foot barrier there.
Thank you so much for clarifying. I appreciate that. So how much longer in this session is there before bills won't be able to advance anymore? How close are we here?
We're getting close. So in the next couple weeks, we'll have what's called a second reading deadline. That means that all the bills will be done in committee and we'll be amending them on the floor. And then after that, we'll have our third reading deadline. That means that's the last day that a bill can be heard on either side. And then after that, it goes into what's called conference committee time. And conference committee is an opportunity where just a few legislators, 2 from the House, 2 from the Senate, come together to work out any differences on the bills. We have a hard stop deadline of April 29th. Constitutionally, we have to be done by that day at midnight. My guess is we will probably be done by April 25th, but I do not want to say that that's the date, but we're shooting for that date.
So we're within a month here.
We are within a month.
A little less. It's flying by. Any other issues the General Assembly is addressing that you'd like to mention? I know property tax reform was a very big one at the State House.
The increase in property taxes has been a very common conversation with myself and my constituents over the last few years. We've seen a rise in that because although you have that 1%, 2%, and 3% constitutionally that we can't raise taxes, the assessed value of homes has skyrocketed. In some cases, some people's percentage has gone up like 37%. Wow. We don't control property taxes on the state level, so this is kind of a tricky place for us to be. We want to make sure that we provide relief and stability for homeowners, but we also want to make sure that if we're going to be touching your property taxes, you still want to have roads, you still want to have your potholes fixed, you still want to have your garbage picked up, you still want to have all those services and expectations that go with what your property taxes go to. So the state doesn't receive a dime of property taxes. We want to make sure that we're being very careful in the decisions that we're making, but we also want to figure out a way to provide relief to our local people.
Representative McNamara, before we let you go and before we don't know when we're going to see you again, so what is your final message that you would tell your constituents? What would you leave them with as we head into the final month of the session? What is your message to them for viewers at home watching?
I think a lot of them are hesitant to get involved, and if they see something, a piece of legislation, aren't really sure of the process. And I encourage them to reach out and ask questions because it's a very confusing process. And you will see a bill and it won't make much sense, but if we're able to just kind of walk you through what's happening, and a lot of times, like right now, I don't know what's happening to our House bills over in the Senate. And senators probably don't know what's happening to their bills over in the House. And the end product is, literally up until that last day. And so I have a lot of folks advocating to place amendments in bills right now. I have one more committee hearing in my committee next week, but I've got a lot of advocates out there asking, can you? And I'm saying, yeah, sure we can. We'll figure this out. But if there's ever a question, make sure they just reach out and ask. That's why I have an intern. That's why I have a staff, and we all do. And just get involved in the process and make sure that, if you have any confusion or just really questions, be sure and ask.
State Representative Wendy McNamara, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for coming on for a second time.
No problem.
We appreciate it. Next week, we'll be joined by several of our local Kentucky legislators. I'm Noah Alatza, Chief Communications Officer for the University of Evansville. Thanks for watching WNIN Lawmakers.